Atheist Anthropology. This lecture is heavily indebted to the many fine anthropologists and scholars who have worked in anthropology in the past and to those working in it now. I have quoted from them extensively in reference to theories of religion such as wishful thinking, social glue, and the rise of the new Cognitivist in the present day. For footnotes, a list of works consulted, and a bibliography for my references this evening, please see AtheistScholar.org, Atheist Anthropologies. The question of how religion began in human societies has been a problematical one since the rise of cultural anthropological studies shortly after Darwin. There are 2 points of especial concern. The first is the lack of agreement among anthropologists about the definition of religion. The second is whether or not to engage in cross-cultural comparison, which has been a fairly standard practice. Many anthropologists in the field today study each culture as an individual entity, which some scholars see as a positive innovation and others find too narrow. For the purposes of this lecture, a broad definition of religion will be used, defining it as a belief in a god or gods and belief in an afterlife. A universal consensus on the definition of religion has yet to be reached. Stuart Guthrie and other scholars have determined that there are 3 main divisions in the anthropological study of religion: social solidarity, the social glue theory, wishful thinking, and intellectualist or cognitivist theory. Social glue studies how religion caters to the need of societies to maintain cohesion and harmony. Prodicus of Chios may have been one of the first to articulate something of the glue theory around 420 BCE, when he located the beginnings of religion with the advent of agriculture and production. There is something of anthropomorphic theory in Prodicus's thinking as well. He comments that humans made things that helped them keep them alive into gods, as happened with bread and wine. The social glue theory was most thoroughly developed by Emil Durkheim around 1912, and in his volume, The Elementary Forms of Religious Life, in 1915. Durkheim was one of the founders of sociology. He was interested in what constituted human identity. He believed that he had found the most basic form of human identification when he studied the totemic Aboriginal tribes of Australia. Durkheim maintained that being in a group gave enormous security to people, and whatever object was near or in the area at the time the euphoric emotions were felt would have projected onto it those same emotions. The object might be a tree, an animal, or vegetable. Soon the item would be replicated in stone or wood and worshipped. That item, he said, was the totem. To arrive at such a theory, Durkheim reviewed a large number of books about the theory and history of religion, primitive social organization, which included family and kinship, and totemism from the most important sociology journal he founded. And these things began to create his ideas and theories for the elementary forms of religious life. Most inspiring to Durkheim was the new Australian ethnology which had come along, particularly the works by the scholars and field researchers Spencer and Gillen. Durkheim studied Spencer and Gillen's work, which contained a body of detailed ethnographic data on functioning totem system that seemed to him to point to a means for the crucial experiment, as he called it, by which he could open up the fundamental difficulties of religion, particularly the origins of religious belief. Durkheim differed from many writers at that time, for whom the Australian data seemed to imply the separation of the social organization and religious factors of totemism. Instead, Durkheim saw totemism as contributing to and constituting Aboriginal social organization, and saw in certain ceremonials of the Arunta people evidence for the function of religion in upholding and reaffirming at regular intervals the collective sentiments and the collective ideas which make the unity and personality of a society. At any rate, influenced by such work, Durkheim began to theorize at greater length concerning the origin and nature of religion. He did not agree with many of the ideas of Freud, Fraser, Tyler, William James, and others. He saw too many individualizing tendencies in their work and did not share their tendency to see religion as an illusion because early people had misinterpreted dreams and natural phenomena. He did not believe in spiritual religion himself, it is necessary to say at this point. He did not see religion as these other thinkers did, is all. Durkheim set out in Elementary Forms of Religious Life to chart a different course to propose a new theory. He rejected any idea of religion in terms of the supernatural, and he vehemently opposed ideas of naturism and animism as inadequate. He defined religion as a system of beliefs and practices relative to the sacred, ones that united their followers into a moral community. He found that such rituals communicate between mankind and their gods, commemorate usually mythical beings and events, expiate sins, and transport the individual through the life course. He found religion a means for people to enhance the participation in a symbolically rich social environment. And this was where his idea of the totem, detailed above, came in. I'm going to digress a bit at this point because Spencer and Gillen's work, which influenced Freud's Totem and Taboo and James Fraser's Golden Bough, as well as Durkheim, was ultimately severely criticized. Ted Strelo was a famous linguist and anthropologist who had been born among the Aranti or Aborigines in Central Australia. His father was a dogmatic, domineering, and charismatic Lutheran missionary. Although Ted Strelo was very erudite and well-respected, he never received his due from English anthropologists, but was very successful and attained excellent teaching and study positions nevertheless. He was very fluent in languages and understood the language of the Arente very well. Later on, he was able to visit some 166 sacred ceremonies dealing with totemic acts. He also published and secured his reputation with Aranda Traditions, 1947. He was very close to many tribesmen from his childhood, and they ultimately shared their sacred beliefs and rites with him as civilizations encroached on them and they feared the old traditions would die out. Strelo found that Spencer and Gillen's work, although on site, was marred by many serious inaccuracies. They had been forced to rely on youthful native intermediaries who spoke pidgin, and they had often been misled. Indeed, these younger helpers often did not know the sacred secrets. Somehow, even the important issue of the nescience of paternal physiological contribution to children was incorrectly transmitted to Spencer and Gillen. These people were said to believe that a child belonged to the totem of the spot at which the mother believed it was conceived, by the entry into her body of a particular spirit from another era. This was highly inaccurate. So it becomes clear that Durkheim, Freud, Fraser, et al. Based some of their theories on inaccurate information. There is a long and interesting history of the theory of totemism, which time does not allow us to traverse this evening, but some of the strongest criticisms of the theory came from the eminent French ethnologist Claude Lévi-Strauss in Totemism, 1963. He was a structuralist, and that was how he approached the topic of the totem. What he was able to gather about the Australian tribes data was that so-called real totemism is not based on similarity of matrilineal and patrilineal types, but on dissimilarities. He finally came to the conclusion that totemism itself is an illusion and is a kind of classifying logic, charting the distinction between man and animal that was a sort of conceptual basis for social differences. He decided that totemism was an after-the-fact explanation in which the social relations and the structures of a group are projected onto natural phenomena, not taken from it. In the present day, the attempt to find universal theories of totems has largely disappeared, and totem studies are undertaken in much more specific cultural concepts. Additionally, many field researchers have found no sacred profane dichotomy, such as Durkheim reported. Durkheim was interested in the connection between religion and the ultimate rise of science. He believed that religious thinking gave humans their first conception of space and time. While some of Durkheim's theories are considered out of date, his writings on the theory of knowledge are still considered outstanding by scholars. A form of his social glue theory is being revived in part by contemporary anthropologists and science writers with the idea of group adaptation, influenced greatly by Durkheim's thinking that things which brought cohesion to the group were considered sacred. I would like to repeat that he believed he found, when studying totems in Aboriginal Australian tribes, that the totem actually stood for the group itself. There are many difficulties with the cohesion theory. It does not seem to take into account the way religion can tear societies apart, with individual members or small groups being persecuted for not believing and or refusing to act in conformance to group standards. Critics have also noted that social glue theories do not really explain what motivates people to act and think religiously. And also it is hard to make a real determination about the theory, since it is now being found that the religions of some societies are not clearly linked to their ethics. And of course, it's worth repeating, religion surely divides groups, not just one from another different group, but within each group itself. There are some very well-received volumes by respected writers in the contemporary scene that are revived theories of social glue. I would like to go over the two most popular, as they are very interesting, but that I find problematical because of their position that religion is adaptationist. Nicholas Wade has written The Faith Instinct, How Religion Evolved and Why It Endures, 2009. The Faith Instinct is an attempt to explain why humans are apparently the only religious primate. It is also a history of religion, an attempt to synthesize recent developments in genetics, biology, and archaeology into a theory of religion's adaptive ability. Wade, a science writer for the New York Times, thinks that morality and religion are products of evolution. He is in the opinion that using a prohibitive god or gods to enforce moral and ethical precepts served as an invisible government to keep order and promote cooperation in primitive societies which had no formal laws, police, or army. He believes that the genes wired into humans have given them a survival advantage, that their neural mechanisms predispose humans to behavior patterns that favor survival. Wade's work is not apt to please either religious believers or atheists. Religious believers will not find the idea that their faith is rooted in neural mechanisms a congenial one. Atheists may agree with his naturalistic interpretation of religion, but most will distrust the positive slant on religion in the book. However, The Faith Instinct is well worth reading because the text brings so many fields together for an exegesis of religion and its sources. A difficulty of the volume is its dependence on the ideas of evolutionary psychology, which, while very popular at present, have made some unscientific claims. For example, we do not have adequate information concerning how hunter-gatherer societies in the Paleolithic period were actually constructed. Many of the facts concerning such societies are highly speculative. But scientists have pointed out that we do know that since our bodies have evolved since the Stone Age, it is very possible that our psychology has also. There are problems comparing our psychology with that of people in the Stone Age. See Atheist Psychologies on AtheistScholar.org for a complete discussion of this topic and some expert opinions. Wade is very critical of Richard Dawkins and others who have launched the new atheism movement, as he thinks they have little evidence to support their belief that religion is bad and non-adaptive. See What is Atheism and Atheist Activism on AtheistScholar.org. Many atheists will find themselves in strong disagreement with such a stance. Faith Instinct is a book to read for its interesting collection of information, but Wade's assertions need a great deal of critical questioning. David Sloan Wilson takes the adaptationist approach with regard to religion in Darwin's Cathedral, Evolution, Religion, and the Nature of Society, 2009. He believes that group selection has played a very important part in the rise of religion in human societies. His point of view originates with the idea that under certain very special conditions, humans become united and function as an organism. He thinks that human groups can be studied by evolutionists just like, he says, trees, guppies, and bacteria. Wilson is the opinion that individuals do not seek to cooperate with others in their group initially, but prefer to freeload from the labors of others. However, some groups establish punishments, often enforced by religion. Norms are created for their members to cooperate and share in the work. When such groups come into contact with less well-organized groups, they will have the survival benefit. Such traits would be selected by genetic evolution. E.O. Wilson, no relation to Sloan Wilson, the distinguished scientist, has recently made similar claims. In his very erudite Social Conquest of the Earth, 2012, he argues for his theory of group rather than kin selection. Elsewhere, E.O. Wilson states that he is a provisional deist, a caveat for the non-religious, which is most of my audience. However, E.O. Wilson is a strong critic of religion. Since the writing of Darwin's Cathedral, David Sloan Wilson, however, has become a director, along with the religious scholar Scott Green, of the Evolutionary Religious Studies program, which is funded by a branch of the Templeton Foundation. David Sloan Wilson has also written very critically, but not objectively, about the new atheists. Darwin's Cathedral makes clear that Sloan Wilson, an evolutionary biologist and an anthropologist, thinks that the evolution of religion is a natural process, but he offers little hard evidence to back up his theory of group selection. Group selection has been a controversial area in anthropology and evolutionary biology for years. Wilson admits that while religion may foster group function, it gives rise to antagonism toward outside groups and people. Neither Wilson nor Nicholas Wade devotes enough attention to the mutual cruelties visited on and by people who belong to different sects of the same religion. It is interesting and obvious that both authors seem to be dusting off portions of Emil Durkheim's theories on religion as social glue. However, it would seem that adopting rational, humane standards for ethical and moral behavior would create more successful and adaptive societies in the present, rather than rationing away religion's errors, fallacies, superstition, and violence. Books such as Wade's and Wilson's would be subject to burning, and the authors' lives at risk in more fundamentally religious societies. There are many aspects of religion that are not adaptive, and one wishes that the authors had given more space to this fact. The wishful thinking theory encompasses the feelings of individuals, explaining religion by its amelioration of fears of death, of being alone, and general human anxiety. Democritus of Abdera, in 5th century Greece, was one of the first Western thinkers to put forth the theory. He stated that people were frightened and excited by what went on in the sky, shooting stars, eclipses, thunder, and lightning, and began to worship these processes as gods. Freud is the principal proponent of the wishful thinking theory. He stated, "Thus the benevolent rule of a divine providence allays our fears of the dangers of life, and the prolongation of earthly existence in a future life provides the local and temporal framework in which these wish fulfillments take place." Freud is an elegant writer, and Future of an Illusion, 1929, is a brilliant and concise book that conveys a salient explanation of the wishful thinking theory of religion. Freud was an atheist, and he came to realize that religion was an opiate for the helplessness humans feel in an unfathomable world. Religion also comforted many people who suffered from anxiety concerning the uncertainties of life and the fear of death. He believed that religion helped to enforce social order. He stated that for civilization to attain and keep stability, there is a necessity to develop a code to prevent murder, theft, and societal disintegration. The ultimate reward for good behavior is placed in heaven after the individual dies, thereby ensuring compliance during life. Freud's theory is the most influential deployment of wishful thinking, particularly in Future of an Illusion. Freud not only locates the origin of religion in our desire for a comforting parent, but also in our deepest wishes, the desire to escape death and the desire for justice. His ideas are not merely the dissection of our deepest desires and fears, but also an explanation about the genealogy of religion, its natural history, in other words. We shall be seeing this attempt at establishing religion's origin in most of the thinkers we glance at this evening. We shall also discuss how successful these attempts have been to date. Of course, such an attack on religion, as well as a so-called scientific explanation of it, immediately attracted attention in philosophical circles. Freud immediately took his place with other notable critics of religion, such as Hume, Feuerbach, and Marx. We might add that his exquisite craftsmanship equaled, if not surpassed, these other philosophers. Basically, Freud struck a huge blow at religion, arguing that 1, religious belief arises from wish fulfillment, and 2, beliefs about the world arising from wish fulfillment are not rationally warranted. So 3, of course, religious beliefs are not rationally warranted. He believed that if we understood his theory, our thinking would then undergo a sea change. We would begin to see that, yes, of course, it would be nice to have a God who created the world and was all benevolent in his exchanges with us. How wonderful if we had a universal moral order, an immortal life. But many thoughtful men and women would realize that, well, yes, those ideas were exactly as we must wish them to be. And that is what has happened when thoughtful, skeptical people read Freud's Future of an Illusion. It either reinforces their doubts and/or negations of religion, or begins to make them question the reality of such ameliorating beliefs. So now let us return to the fact that religious belief is unwarranted. One does not need to read any of the literature to know that such a theory, purporting to be the natural history of religion and concluding with how unwarranted religious beliefs are, attracted the criticism of many philosophical theologians, and unfortunately, not all the critiques were incorrect. We need to keep in mind while we talk about unwarranted belief that until recently, Freud's theory, originally so embraced by secular thinkers, is partially rejected because psychoanalytic theory is dismissed by many psychologists in the present day. Fortunately, we shall see that some young scholars have reworked the wishful thinking theory, excising some concepts, conducting studies, and restating it in contemporary jargon. But no matter how they dress it up, it is still based on Freud's original thinking. So, we have Freud's adamant belief that religion is unwarranted belief. And naturally, one of Freud's foremost critics will be seen to pop up here in the person of Alvin Plantinga, the theist philosophers whose ideas were discussed in my earlier lecture, What is Atheism? And Arguments for and Against the Existence of God, on AtheistScholar.org. If you recall, Dr. Plantinga is the author of a 3-volume magnum opus, Warranted Christian Belief, 2000 to 2009. He is not about to let Freud get away with claiming religion is unwarranted. Plantinga claims that Freud was obligated to give evidence that theistic belief arises from the mechanism of wish fulfillment. It is right here that Plantinga has hit on the weakest point of Freud's argument. For how could Freud produce evidential proof for his theory? We do not have any historical records that would allow us to trace the origin of religion, and we never shall. Religion, certainly folk religion, predates written records. But that clever thinker, Plantinga, is not satisfied with his potent objection. He hits yet another blow at wishful thinking by pointing out that many core beliefs of many religions are not motivationally attractive. This expression, motivationally attractive, is some of the new jargon that dresses up wishful thinking in stylish new clothes. I will be using the phrase motivationally attractive this evening when discussing wishful thinking because many scholars today in the field of sociology, psychology, and even philosophy find it a comfortable umbrella term for describing robust theories. This jargon, while not elegant, is very helpful to Freud's theory. However, Plantinga is not helpful to Freud, and as we return to his ideas, we must concede a point to Plantinga. He is determined to undermine Freud. He points out that many people who are believers do not really like the idea of an all-powerful God who sees and knows everything about them and will ultimately reward and punish them in the afterlife. Indeed, other thinkers have found similar objections. There are religions, such as Christianity, in which the idea of an afterlife is so terrifying that many of its worshippers are in constant fear, particularly if they believe they have transgressed against religious laws and deserve punishment rather than reward in the next life. There are religions, too, which contain concepts of demons and spirits who are ready to trick humans and then punish the unwary. Another difficulty with the wish fulfillment theory is that in the ancient Greek religion, for example, the idea of the afterlife was vague. Ancient Greek afterlife was a pale shadow of life on earth. No rewards were meted out to the faithful or punishments to the sinners. Such ideas are not motivationally attractive. At this point, we can thankfully leave Plantinga and move to critiques of Freud from respected anthropological theorists of religion. Such critics make many points which are not really disputable. For example, where they point out that what we humans deeply desire, immortality and justice, is offered by many religions that are not monotheistic, such as Hinduism. Freud's thinking concerning religion was based on a monotheistic God. Critics have also pointed out that since Freud was a Western thinker, he did not touch on the maternalist religions or on the early religions which did not contain a sky god, let alone a monotheistic God. As Pascal Boyer points out, many religions anthropologists have studied do not offer moral reckoning. He explains that in some of these cultures, dead people just become ghosts or ancestors. Many of these anthropologists state that Freud's wishful thinking begins to appear very parochial because of these omissions. There are more objections to wishful thinking. Stuart Guthrie points out that even if all features of religion were ameliorating, without the frightening ideas such as hell and eternal punishment, let us say, theories like wish fulfillment would still be shaky. He explains that in other areas of life, we do not automatically believe what feels good. Hungry people do not content themselves, he continues, with imagining they have eaten. Guthrie, too, may be contradicted here. In our time, we have seen the power of the placebo in medicine. Simply believing a medicine or surgical procedure will help many people feel better, even though they have received a sugar pill or a small incision that did nothing in physical terms to allay their condition. I am taking so much time with wishful thinking because it has been consigned to the dustbin of weak theories in some anthropological and sociological circles. But as I mentioned earlier, there are now some scholars, such as Sean Nichols, who make a strong case for what they call the motivational transmission of religion hypothesis. They believe that there is still a way to defend the idea that motivation plays a key role in religious belief. When they use such words as motivational, what they really mean are attractive notions, such as the aforementioned notion of immortality. They believe that some of the most successful religions are the Abrahamic ones that fit Freud's description pretty well. So their formulations are only applied to Judaism, the oldest, Christianity, the second in line, and finally the youngest, Islam. These scholars have a theory that religions descending from the ones before them, as the above two newer religions, Christianity and Islam, have from Judaism, do not do very well if they do not contain the previous religion's motivationally attractive elements. Nichols uses deism, an offshoot of theism and Christianity, as an example. How many people embrace deism, which believes that God created the world and then left for somewhere and is not active in this world? Another way to state this is that deism and other such beliefs do not have much cultural cachet. These researchers point out that there are many creedal beliefs that are what they call culturally fit, and that those elements of belief that are most attractive to humans are shared by the three religions just mentioned, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Among other commonalities, immortality and justice are integral to these three belief systems. The oldest, Judaism's attractive elements have passed down to the Christian religion, and then down from Christianity to Islam. It is, of course, more complex when the whole picture is looked at, but they focus on this passing down of a few belief elements to make a case for a more up-to-date version of wishful thinking. The elements they focus on are the concepts that we are looking at this evening. Once again, immortality and justice. It's an interesting theory, and these scholars' evidence, or much of it, lies in the creedal documents of each belief system. They cite the Jewish Maimonides' 13 Principles as an example, and they have discovered that the Catholic Apostles' Creed has motivationally attractive elements that it shares with Maimonides. For Islam, many of these researchers use volumes such as W. Watt's Islam Creeds, 1994, as their source, and find that Islam, the last descending religion of note from Judaism and Christianity, shares motivationally attractive elements with Christianity. These thinkers do not discount many other important elements fueling religious ideas and their dispersion, such as war, politics, economic forces, and so on, but they have come up with a tantalizing hypothesis. Certainly, such a theory retains a great deal of Freud's earlier wishful thinking, and at the same time does away with Freud's outdated psychological ideas. I think it is worth taking into consideration. One does not need to abandon the whole of Freud's thinking, but rather consider how many parts of his theory have merit. There is even more weight for wishful thinking coming from researchers such as Ara Norenzayan, Will Gervais, Ira Hansen, and others who are not necessarily atheists but are conducting many studies on various aspects of religion and atheism. Norenzayan's interest is in the area of cognitive and evolutionary psychology, but his work is stronger and more compelling than much of the other work coming from that field. He and Hansen did a recent study that discovered that when people in North America are made aware of death, called mortality salience, their belief in supernatural agents intensified. They did 4 studies. In studies 1 and 2, awareness of death increased belief in religiosity, God, and divine intervention. The 3rd and 4th studies' results are somewhat more surprising. When made aware of death, supernatural agent beliefs increased even though they were introduced in a culturally alien context. When the participants in 3 were presented with the divine Buddha, their belief increased. And in study 4, the subjects even believed more in shamanic spirits. Such latter effects occurred primarily, the researchers state, in the already religiously affiliated, who were predominantly Christian. There is now a strong school of researchers studying the implications of, and I quote, the role of supernatural agent beliefs in assuaging mortality concerns. This school of thought is frequently designated as terror management theory. And so we find we are pretty much back to Freud's original proposition of people being assuaged by religious beliefs when faced with thoughts of death and their fear of it. It seems as though if we can divest ourselves or separate ourselves from many incorrect and or outdated Freudian psychoanalytic notions, we can retain his penetrating analysis of people's desire for wish fulfillment beliefs. Many of the current generation of researchers accept Freud's theories of people desiring immortality and of people desiring justice for the just, but have discarded the father figure component of religious belief. I don't think this is necessary for Western people. I hate to be redundant, but even a quick look at the language of some Christian churches, especially the Catholic, retains very revealing terms. Such churches deploy the words God the Father, and their priests are addressed as Father. It is pretty obvious we need to look more closely at the wishful thinking theory and not divest ourselves of some of its more robust features. There is difficulty with holding the theory true for all people, however, because as we have just seen, the results of the studies showed that it was primarily people invested in their religion who derived amelioration from fear vis-a-vis a death anxiety. Kenneth E. Vail, Zachary Rothschild, and others have found that mortality salience not only raises belief in an afterlife and supernatural agents, but also notions of human ascension from nature and spiritual distinctions between mind and body. The researchers state, and here I quote again, although secular beliefs can also serve a terror management function, religious beliefs are particularly well suited to mitigate death anxiety because they are all-encompassing, rely on concepts that are not easily disconfirmed, and promise literal immortality. Once again, however, we see in this study that these comforting results took place in people who were pretty religious to begin with. So wishful thinking, while very interesting, does not help us pinpoint the origins of religion. In Future of an Illusion, Freud discusses his belief that an illusion such as religion will give way with education and scientific progress. It is to be hoped that the prediction from the founder of psychoanalysis will come to be realized. The third theory, the intellectualist or cognitivist theory, is a belief that individuals need to explain the world, how it began, what makes it function, and what their place might be in it. Democritus determined that although the movement of the heavens frightened people, they were also struck by its precise regularity and made gods of some of the processes. That Democritus went on to develop atomism and explain the universe in terms of how it made sense conceptually as an interesting comment on the explanation idea. He did away with the necessity for belief in the gods. Robin Horton was an anthropologist who believed that religious thought and scientific thought were similar, as both try to reduce complexity and chaos to understanding and order. Cognitivism has had the most cultural cachet of all the anthropological theories of late, but social glue, unfortunately, seems to be growing. Edward Tyler, considered by many to be the father of cultural anthropology, was the principal proponent of the cognitivist theory in the 1870s. His most important work was Primitive Culture, Researches into the Development of Mythology, Philosophy, Religion, Art, and Custom, 1871. During travels for his health, Tyler encountered cultural differences and participated in archaeological studies of primitive cultures in an attempt to find a common denominator. He believed in the linear progression of society and thought religion was a primitive, archaic form that had no place in the civilized world. He collected masses of facts from archaeologists, ethnologists, and missionaries who were observing tribes all over the world to draw his conclusions. He concluded that religion had its roots in attempts to explain the world. Tyler thought that the earliest form of religion was animism, and that religious thought had progressed over time into a more sophisticated form of organized religion. One of Tyler's most important ideas was that of animism, a belief in spirit beings. He theorized that animism originated from dreaming and from observing other people's deaths. He maintained that religion was superstitious thinking based on magical belief and that it had no place in the civilized world. Tyler was convinced of human evolutionary progress, and he maintained that the survival of religion was due to faulty logic. He stated, "It is a harsher and at times even painful office of ethnography to expose the remains of crude old cultures which have passed in a harmful superstition, and to mark these out for destruction. Yet this work, if less genial, is not less urgently needful for the good of mankind. Thus active at once in aiding progress and removing hindrance, the science of culture is essentially a reformer's science." This comes from Primitive Culture, 1871. While dated and criticized for being overly Western mind-oriented, Primitive Culture is an interesting volume for the non-religious reader. But later critics found Tyler's theory incomplete. They pointed out that religion encompasses human emotional processes and that the feeling portion of religion had been left out of intellectualist theories. The Cognitivist theory has had at least 2 revivals, one in the 60s and one in the present day. Clifford Geertz was an important figure in the 1960s as he was able to synthesize several anthropological theories. Quoted here is his elegant conclusion that religion is a system of symbols which acts to establish powerful, pervasive, and long-lasting moods and motivations in men by formulating conceptions of a general order of existence and clothing these concepts in such an aura of factuality that the moods and motivations seem uniquely realistic. It is no surprise that this naturalistic definition of religion is quoted often in texts of the anthropology of religion. Before discussing the 2 most significant schools of cognitivism in the present day, it will be helpful to quickly run over some of the basic tenets held by most cognitivists. Cognitivist theories of religion usually define religion with its connection to the supernatural and supernatural agencies. Here are its general principles, which are predicated on how religion is transmitted and acquired, and how the mind works in relation to these principles. Kenneth McKendrick and other scholars have laid out these principles in an orderly fashion. These principles then are: 1, our understanding of other minds with emphasis on intent; 2, bias to detect agency; 3, gravitation toward purpose-based explanations of origins; 4, dualistic notions of body and mind; 5, acceptance of non-natural causality; and 6, very memorable retention of counterintuitive representations. Intellectualists not only believe our minds are very susceptible to religious ideas, most maintain that our minds are wired to generate these ideas in a spontaneous manner. Such ideas lead to the strong naturalist theory that religion is supremely natural. Hence, it might be nearly impossible to eradicate. Most atheists will disagree, and there is good reason to dissent. We will go into all these reasons as the lecture progresses. There is little hard evidence that religion is natural. Such a theory posits human willingness to accept the notion of supernatural agencies. Their religionizing of cognition then is made systematic by these scholars and can be used to state, by means of identifying the elements I just listed above, that the origins of religion originated in our evolutionary past. This systematization of religious cognition does not seem robust when examined carefully, which we will do as we cover the thinking of well-received intellectualists and conclude with a short critique. In the present day, there are 2 schools of cognitivism which are of great interest to atheists as they are naturalistic. One group is the opinion that culture and religious ideas spread rather like a virus. Pascal Boyer and Scott Atran are 2 of the more prominent members of this school. they find that counterintuitive ideas such as a talking tree or a walking mountain are so out of the realm of the natural world that these ideas become memorable and are passed on. Scott Atran has written in Gods We Trust, The Evolutionary Landscape of Religion, 2002. Atran is a cognitive anthropologist who once worked with Margaret Mead. He has similar views with Pascal Boyer concerning the evolution and endurance of religion in human societies. Atran discusses why a community would have a commitment to a world of supernatural agents who have no basis in fact or intuition and would help alleviate the existential angst of its citizens. He believes that people use a thinking process that somehow makes use of exaggerated everyday cognitive processes to manufacture beings and worlds that are memorable, easily transmitted, and survive well in human societies. In Gods explains that cognitive modules exist in human minds, probably led by predator detection in these modules. The tendency to believe in the supernatural is a byproduct of evolution, reinforced by a few positive responses to life and death crises that set the stage for religion to take hold. Atran as Boyer dismisses memes, group selection, and wish fulfillment theories. Some thinkers have been put off by Atran's pessimistic view that because of the way human brains function, religion is likely to endure indefinitely. Some secular people will not agree, seeing growing secular trends in Western society and elsewhere. There are over 1 billion non-believers worldwide now. Pascal Boyer has written many works on cognitive theory, and his Religion Explained, The Evolutionary Origins of Religious Thought, 2001, is a very significant book in this field. Boyer, a cognitive anthropologist, believes that the mind evolved as a module system with various systems of inference. He finds that there is not one single point of view for explaining religion. Instead, Boyer believes that religion is an artificial system, a type of construct that is transmitted in a viral manner from individual to individual and group to group. He has found many ideas that are what he calls counterintuitive. Counterintuitive ideas are more memorable, such as a walking tree or a talking fish, and are more likely to be remembered and passed on. We have just heard, when glancing at social glue theories, that many anthropologists suggest various adaptive reasons for the prevalence of religious ideas, while others think that the adaptation is not valid, that there is scientific evidence and logical reasoning against it. Boyer turns the concept of adaptation or advantageous survival on its head. He states that the modern mind came about at nearly the same time that primitive religion took hold. The hunter-gatherer or Paleolithic period was when human minds were able to establish more connections between different inference systems, such as observed from their hunting and tool-making techniques. It was also the period when they created visual representation of supernatural and/or imaginative concepts. This era would have been approximately 100,000 to 50,000 years ago. Boyer states that to draw something that never existed, for example a chimera, suggests decoupling and counterintuitive processes taking place in a newly liberated human mind. Humans began to experience changes in their cognitive processes as mental fluidity developed, making an exchange from one medium to another possible, as artifacts were made into jewelry, paintings show some knowledge of biology, and tools made use of the local environment. Boyer concludes, we are no longer surprised that religious concepts and behaviors have persisted for millennia, probably much longer, and display similar themes the world over. These concepts just happen to be optimal in a sense that they activate a variety of systems in a way that makes their transmission possible. Boyer does not explain religion completely, as promised in the title of his book. Religion Explained and Atron's In God We Trust are both important examples of the revival of cognitivism and will be of interest to secular people. Guthrie points out a strong problem concerning the counterintuitive theory. Darwin found that cognition and perception are selected for usefulness. Counterintuitive ideas are false, so why would the mind evolve to favor them? Before I begin talking about Stuart Guthrie's anthropomorphism theory, I would like to quote David Hume, the skeptical philosopher of the Scottish Enlightenment, who wrote The Natural History of Religion, 1757, and Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, 1779. In Natural History of Religion, the great Hume said, "We find human faces in the moon, armies in the clouds, and by a natural propensity, if not corrected by experience and reflection, ascribe malice and goodwill to everything that hurts or pleases us." For more on human skepticism, see AtheistScholar.org, Atheist Philosophies, and the book list under Atheist Anthropologies. The second school of cognitivism is exemplified by Stuart Guthrie, who theorizes that the rise of religion has much to do with an intuitively evolved cognitive system. Stuart Guthrie's work, Faces in the Clouds, A New Theory of Religion, 1995, explains his thinking. Guthrie is one of the prime promoters of the anthropomorphic theory of religion. He considers religion to be systematic anthropomorphism. Anthropomorphism is the tendency to attribute human characteristics to non-human objects. He draws examples from art, literature, philosophy, and advertising to demonstrate how pervasive human anthropomorphism is. Guthrie believes a great deal of it depends on the human ability to detect movement or perceive what appears to be a human face or body. This tendency is due to the human attempt to detect potential predators near us. A quick decision must be made concerning the correct course of action: fight, flight, or friendliness. We are cognitively attuned to movement and faces. Any hint which might seem like a movement or a face, even if we are mistaken, is an excellent protection. To overinterpret a tree stump, a movement in the bushes, what looks like a pair of eyes in the woods is a safe mistake. Little is lost. But if our perception is correct, it could save us from harm or death. The opposite error, being unaware of movement or possible predators, could be deadly. The stakes for human preservation are very high in predator detection, and our anthropomorphism seems to be a great protective mechanism. Guthrie believes the same tendency works with religion. Sensing what we might superstitiously think a spirit, animism, or seeing a tree shape as human, anthropomorphism, is a benefit. Religion might be a mistake, but it is a very safe one. Just because there is no God, no consciousness in nature, does not matter to humans as they persist in seeing the opposite. They create meaning, says Guthrie. Guthrie is a cognitivist and lays out his argument in Faces in the Clouds with great strength and persuasiveness. He dismisses wishful thinking and social cohesion theories. Faces in the Clouds is a very informative volume, yet it is not a complete theory of theories about religion. The thinking of cognitivists such as Guthrie, Boyer, and Atron that religion is a byproduct of traits formed through evolution, which will be difficult or impossible to eradicate, is very cogent, but unlikely to be a good predictor of the rise of secularism. As we have said before, secularism is gaining numbers in many parts of the world. Understanding the processes of human minds is the first step to ridding people of false belief in gods and religion. As we discussed in an earlier lecture, Atheist Sociologies, religion is less important in well-off, socially stable nations as a rule. If the world can be improved, religion may become less and less rewarding. See Atheist Demographics at AtheistScholar.org. I would like to refer back to Kenneth McKendrick and other scholars at this point because they all have some excellent critiques of cognitivism. I must apologize for using a thinker from the theist side of the quarrel, but to my knowledge and from my research, I have yet to find a more penetrating critique. There is little hard evidence that religion is natural. This theory actually posits our willingness to accept the notion of supernatural agencies. Such a religionizing of cognition, then, is made systematic by cognitivist anthropologists and can be used by means of identifying the elements mentioned above in the theory to argue very persuasively that the origin of religion originates in our evolutionary past. Such a procedure reminds me of some of the circular arguments I have spoken about in an earlier lecture concerning so-called proof of God's existence. I do not believe that cognitivism has proved that the origin of religion lies in our past evolutionary development. Some scholars even call the cognitive naturalist thesis a religious redescription of cognition. This is a strong criticism, but one that needs to be considered. Many scholars do not accept the notion of free-floating religious cognition with not even a nod to history or socialization. Furthermore, it has been noted that it is more alienated and atomistic Neolithic societies with inequality, warfare, slavery, and other ills that seem to be more focused on the transcendence offered by religion rather than the more stable societies of the past. I would like to quote McKendrick here because his statement is so well put and to the point. This clear identification of the origin of religion in natural history as well as developmental history threatens to become a sui generis discourse when it unnecessarily and illicitly replaces more compelling, systematically, and historically viable accounts of cognition. In other words, cognitive theories of religion, by relying on a troubling and contested definition of religion without reference to its historical continuities and political implication, create and foster an ideological posturing that, while appearing to be interdisciplinary and scientifically minded, is conceptually anti-historical and ahistoriographical. Now, one can say that thinkers such as McKendrick want to cast doubt on naturalistic theories of religion, but still, the cognitivist school has such a pessimistic theory concerning the all-pervasiveness of religion and little hope of chipping away at it, as I just mentioned, that I think some atheists might be inclined to consider the cognitivist theory flawed. Some cognitivists give a slight nod to early childhood, but it is Sean Nichols of the new Wishful Thinking School, as well as Josh Rothman, Deborah Kellerman, and other researchers who think that what they call, as we have seen earlier in this lecture, non-motivationally attractive as well as motivationally attractive beliefs are acquired through testimony. They state that most people acquire their belief system or parts of it from the testimony of their parents and other elders of their community. According to Rothman and Kellerman, there is almost no evidence for the existence of religious beliefs in early childhood. When children are socialized into religious thoughts and practices is when religiosity emerges. This is a very interesting idea. It does not explain the origin of religious ideas and belief, but it may account for the spread of such notions, which seems to me more viable than the meme theory, of which more in a second. Adherents of the testimony theory believe it explains why and how divergent beliefs are passed along. It accounts for why Christians believe in one God, the same Spirit, in the Trinity, and why Hindus continue to believe in many gods. In any case, researchers have found very little evidence for spontaneous religiosity. Cognitive theories seem to sometimes be floating in a theoretical bubble, divorced from transmission evidence as well as not accounting for religion's development vis-a-vis historical, political, and social happenings. There is yet another theory concerning the transmission of religion, that of the meme. Despite their theory that religion spreads like a virus, neither Boyer nor Atran subscribe to the meme theory, first put forth by the biologist Richard Dawkins in his volume, The Selfish Gene, 1976. A meme is an idea or belief transmitted from one person or group to another. It is analogically similar to a gene in biology, although a meme is cultural. Dawkins thinks that the meme of God survives by cultural use of language, great art, and great music. He thinks the God meme superficially answers needs that humans have, such as help with feelings of personal inadequacy, hope of reward in the next life, and explanations of the workings of the world. Boyer believes that memes are a good start, but states that replication is misleading. He explains that human minds will seize on ideas that seem like good explanations or interesting ideas, and that they will be transmitted to others because human minds are similar to each other. Daniel C. Dennett is a professor of philosophy and cognitive science who embraces the meme theory. Otherwise, his book, Breaking the Spell, Religion is a Natural Phenomenon, 2006, is an excellent study of the origins of religion and how it grows. Well-versed in psychological and biological theories concerning humans, Dennett has a firm foundation in anthropological studies of religion as well. Part 2 of his volume, the section on the evolution of religion, synthesizes some of the best and most interesting theories about the primitive roots of religion, including language, intentionality, and more. Dennett's theories are an important addition to the understanding of religion's allure and the natural origins of religion. He states that he is writing not just for the atheist or agnostic, but for the religious. He hopes some religious readers will come to understand the deepest roots of their belief system. He thinks they can then begin to weed the harmful from the beneficial effects of their religion. Breaking the Spell is a wonderful volume for the atheist who would like a brief overview of theories of religion, how it began, how humans started to protect their beliefs, and how it perpetuates itself. In Part 2, Dennett synthesizes many theories about religion's genesis into a very cohesive and informative design that conveys what it promises. It explains how religion originated and why it endures. Dennett is expert at blending theories from such thinkers as Boyer and David Sloan Wilson, from biological research, evolutionary psychology, biology, and other fields to explain the particular spell cast by religion. He spent some time explaining how intentionality, a specialty of his, operates. He says, they, humans, begin to treat other things in the world as agents with limited beliefs about the world, specific desires, and common sense to do the rational thing given those beliefs and desires. He continues to develop the idea of intentionality by explaining that when an animal treats something as an agent with beliefs and desires, it can be considered to have adopted the intentional stance. He explains that many of the mobile animals have developed a two-pronged ability to decipher motion development. They can frequently divide what he calls banal motion, which is rustling of leaves, swaying of grass, and so on, from what might be animate motion or biological motion. Such motion could signal the presence of another human being who could be, worst case, a predator or, best case, a mate. He humorously says that this is a fairly well-tuned device. If you startle too quickly, you will lose your supper. If you fail to startle at possible dangerous motions, you will soon be somebody else's dinner. Justin Barrett explains that we animals are also provided with a detection device that goes over the top, the Hyperactive Agent Detection Device, or HADD, H-A-D-D. Many animals have it. For example, when a pet jumps at snow falling off the roof eaves, that is the HADD device at work. Dennett provides interesting new insight into animal behavior and intent from research results. Many animals, such as mammals and birds, not only can distinguish animate movements, but also discern and discriminate the movements most likely to be of concern to them. Will this other attack or flee, turn to right or left? Does it see me yet? Does it want to eat me or the person next to me? Will it back down if I threaten it? Dennett states that these most clever animals have adopted the intentional stance. It is worth repeating here his explanation that these clever animals treat other things in the world as 1, agents, with 2, limited beliefs about the world, 3, specific desires, and 4, enough common sense to do the rational thing given those beliefs and desires. He explains that if you have ever tried to catch a wild animal, you will know what he calls the ensuing arms race. Ploy and counterploy, deceptive moves, and intelligent detection of deceptive moves, and so on. He says that whenever an animal treats something as an agent, with beliefs and desires, with knowledge and goals, I say it is adopting the intentional stance or treating that thing as an intentional system. However, no animal but the human seems, as far as we now know, to have the ability for third-order intentionality. Only a human will want you to believe that it thinks you are hiding behind a tree on the left and not the right. Humans can achieve fifth-order intentionality easily, and small children apparently do not have to be taught such skills. Intentionality may be natural. We extend this intentionality to people close to us who die, immediately trying to guess at what they would want or what their wishes would be. We do not want to part from them. But as Dennett explains, a corpse is a potent source of disease, and we have a disgust mechanism to make us want to be away from decaying things. Longing to keep the dead person who lives in our memory and forced back from the dead by disgust, we have a conflict that people like Pascal Boyer believe has played a central role in the belief of religions and the birth of religions everywhere. To manage such a difficult conflict, humans have created an elaborate burial ceremony which takes care of the corpse by burying, burning, putting it out to sea, and so on. The dead person is still there, they believe, an unseen presence as a spirit, nearly as vivid as a live person, and seen in dreams to confirm its continued presence. Dennett concludes that at the root of human belief in gods lies an instinct on a hair trigger, the disposition to attribute agency, beliefs, and desires and other mental states to anything complicated that moves. He also states that we over-attribute intentions to moving things in the environment, the process which is called animism, literally meaning giving a soul to the mover. He calls attention to the fact that persuading angry clouds to give us water was deadly serious at one time, that humans were sacrificed to bring animistic beliefs about. From chapters about the early origins of religion and folk religions, Dennett moves on to discuss humans becoming the stewards of their own belief systems, belief in belief, religious guilds, a buyer's guide to religion, and more. Dennett thinks the supposed benefits of religion should be scrutinized scientifically and weighed against its harm. Breaking the Spell's chapter concerning religion and morality concludes that the presumed relation between religion and morality is an illusion. He posits many alternative roads on the way to goodness. I would like to remind the viewers this evening that Atheist Philosophy, Part 2, Two Atheist Philosophers on AtheistScholar.org, discusses Ludwig Feuerbach, the important 19th century philosopher who had such an impact on Marx. Feuerbach's theory of projection really should not be left out of any serious discussion of religious roots. Since I have already covered his views in an earlier lecture, I will not go deeply into them tonight. However, his theory was that people sensed that they could make themselves better and their societies into a better world. Faced with the reality of the difficulty of changing themselves and the world, they instead projected those ideals onto a supernatural being and evaded the real task of transforming themselves. Of course, that ideal supernatural being was called God. We have seen many theories of religion and its origin tonight, but as yet, no single theory that provides us with a cohesive, cogent explanation for religion or for its beginning. We have glanced at the idea that religion leads to community cohesion and cooperation, which leads to so-called cultural fitness. But why do we need the spirits and gods that are nearly universal components of belief? Then there is the notion that religion answers individuals' deepest needs to understanding the nature of the universe. But we have contradictory evidence that many people are very content with having no answers. And secondly, many religions provide no real answers, prizing mystery over knowledge. The amelioration of the fear of death from religion does not seem universal either. Some religions do not have a clear picture of the afterlife, and others offer a picture that is frightening and dark. Then we peruse the theory that religion is a byproduct of other very important cognitive processes. Religion may be a side effect created by our brains in an effort to solve day-to-day problems. There appears to be a temporal lobe in the brain that is extremely adept at face recognition. Small infants seem to be able to respond to the difference between animate and inanimate objects, suggesting that our brains are ready to learn such differences, as we have discussed earlier in this lecture. And there is in some cases, and I emphasize some cases, because this trait is not universal to all people, some of us exhibit better reasoning skills on social problems than on what researchers call logically identical problems that are non-social. So there is a theory that social problem solving is so important to our daily success that we transfer and use these skills in events that we cannot quite understand. Cui bono, we ask, who will benefit? And conversely, who will suffer by this happening? Or was this event somehow a retributive one for some violation? This theory now maintains that ideas concerning divine laws that must be followed, or agents, supernatural ones which must be obeyed, are the way our minds produce such notions and explanations automatically. None of the theories we have glanced at this evening have been satisfactory for one explanation of the origin of religion. We know that folk religion, then organized religion, is nearly universal, as is the promise of some sort of immortality and justice among many of the religions which have had the most endurance. We are told by the cognitive school that we are unlikely to be able to eradicate religion. Perhaps. But as we learn more about how the human brain functions and the origins of belief in the human mind, as our knowledge progresses through scientific advances, the grip of organized religion might weaken and become marginalized, or at the very best, a minority choice. Many of us in the secular community would like to see much less of learned theories that tout the adaptive, positive qualities of religion. They are beginning to have the whiff of religious apologetics, and some of its best-known proponents are beginning to sound as if they are apologists for the continuance of religion. If the evidence emerges that religion was once adaptive, and that is why its presence in society has continued so long, then hard evidence must be accepted. But it is not necessary for human societies to continue with such false, pernicious, and non-adaptive systems as most religions are in the present day, and as many in the secular community believe they were in the past. The anthropology of religion is still contentious. Critics point out that many of its prominent scholars have begun from a position of assuming religion was based on false premises and set out to prove that theory rather than letting the facts lead them. Many atheists will find themselves in agreement with the false premise theory that religion is indeed based on false premises, and the evidence for such a statement is plentiful. Religion has a long, dark, and shameful past and present in human societies. From the torture and murder of apostates, heretics, and atheists, the murder of people of different religions, warfare between people in the same society or between countries, witch burning, the present religious and civil wars in the Mideast, Africa, and elsewhere, from the abuse of women and children and animals, one can see very little about religion that is adaptable. I do not believe we will ever see hard evidence for the desirability of the continuance of religion in the world. I am very thankful to the secular anthropologists and scholars who labor on to find the true origin of religious beliefs. It may not be one source, but a combination of all the theories we have traversed this evening. The more we learn about the enduring falsehood of religion, the more we can find methods to finally marginalize its presence and effects in our contemporary world. Thank you for your attention this evening.